So today, as Stanley and Jack have alluded to, we're going to talk Eastern Raptor ID. We're not going to focus on all the species, but I want to focus on the main ones, especially for those that are able to attend Rockfish Gap or any site, in the East Coast. A lot of the species that we're going to go over tonight are those that you'll have a good chance at seeing at your local hawk watch. As Vic alluded to, a lot of the broadwings are either coming through or have already gone through. I know I was at the Detroit River Hawk Watch this weekend, and I had a single broadwing, which in mid-October is actually a pretty good sighting. That's a late bird. But we're used to thousands in September ourselves. So broadwings are ramping down, and the other colder season bootios are starting to ramp up, like red tails, red shoulders, and so on. So the way I always start this program is with some fun videos. So these are two bald eagles kind of chasing each other, and it's not a breeding thing. The adult is going after the juvenile for fish, and now the juvenile has lost the fish and is going after the adult. And what's interesting is what's going to happen here in a second when the juvenile kind of inverts, and he's going to lock talons with this bird. And he's really grabbing at that fish, trying to pull it away. And this is a very well-known behavior of bald eagles, fighting for that meal. Nature is not nice, and they don't know when they're going to get that next meal. This is an American Kestrel hover hunting. It's just an exciting way to show how they hunt. And just look at how rock steady and solid her head is as she's hover hunting. Her legs and her body are flailing around, but she's keeping that head nice and firm and straight, which is amazing because, for anyone who's, a photographer and loves their image stabilization, that's nature providing image stabilization at its best. So I always like to show a few videos. The last one I want to show is same family as the Kestrel, another falcon. This is a Merlin. And this footage, I'm going to set it up a little bit. It was taken at Cape May, New Jersey, and this Merlin's going to catch a songbird on the wing. So for you songbird lovers, my heart goes out to you. But as a raptor guy, raptors got to eat. So you tell me if you can see the songbird come in and get nabbed by the Merlin. So here's our Merlin coming around. Bam. So if you missed it, it's already happened. But the good news is I'm going to play it again, and I'm going to do it in some stop action. So hopefully you can get a better sense for, what's going on here. Oh, not yet. One more. All right, here we go. All right, so that's the real time. The next video we're going to show is stop action. I'm going to point out the songbird. So you got two chances to see this bird. Now we're going to see it in slow-mo. We'll see the bird come in. I'll point it out. It's in the upper hand part of the screen. Right here coming down. It's this little speck. Watch the bird inverts, grabs the songbird, flips back over, and on its way to Delaware it goes. Just unreal. And what's crazy is when I filmed that, I had no idea what happened until later that night when I was reviewing footage. I thought, what did I just see there? And slowed it down, and sure enough, saw that songbird unfortunately meet its demise. But you know what? This is a wonderful display of behavior by Merlins that can actually aid you in identification. This is the bird now eating on the wing. They don't even stop to eat. This bird's still flying south. You can see it pulling stuff out of its talons, and on its way it's go. It's nature's fast food, and that's a wonderful display of identification behavior because Merlins are absolutely known for hunting on the wing during migration and continuing on while they're eating and migrating all at the same time. And so those, other than that behavioral trick there, there wasn't really anything identification-wise in those clips. It was really just a way of hopefully getting you excited about raptors and show you a little bit into just how awesome they really are. When it comes to raptors, oftentimes they really trick us, especially in flight, because so often all we see are dark specks in the sky. We're not offered that field mark capability, or, you know, really solid, long-lasting looks where we can look for, you know, the coloration on their head or their backs or their outer wings or this and that. With Raptors, you really have to change your mindset. And so the point of this will be a good exercise for you to use your chat. For those of you that have your chat open, I'd like you to enter into your chat window how many species of raptor you see on the screen. And so go into your chat and just put a number in what you think, how many different species of raptor you see here. But again, the point of Raptor ID and what we're going to focus on tonight is flight ID. So characteristics of how they fly, the shape that they take on, whether they're soaring or gliding in the air, how they're flapping their wings, whether it's deep, shallow, is it stiff, is it floppy, is it loose, is it painful looking, is it arthritic, different things like that. And it's no different than field mark ID. It's just getting rid of field marks and replacing field marks with something else descriptive that helps you narrow down the field. So for those that guessed, this is the trick question. There is one species of raptor on the screen here. These are all sharp-shinned hawks. And the point, if you look at some of these birds, like the middle right, almost looks like it has a round tail. Same in the bottom right, very much round-looking tail. But all the books will tell you to look for a squared off tail on a Sharpie. And so when you're comparing Sharpies and Cooper's hawks, oftentimes, you know, it's one identification technique is never enough. And so what I always like to tell people is, you know, you really have to look at multiple pieces of the puzzle. Put those pieces of the puzzle together before you can definitively tell what type of species you're looking at. And as I alluded to, it really is a different form of identification, and you really have to throw out that classic Peterson-esque field mark ID and just change your mindset to looking for, again, wing shape, wing cadence, what it looks like while it's flying, whether it's soaring or gliding or in active flight while it's flapping, things like that. And more often than not, this is the same peregrine repeated on the slide, but more often than not, we're going to see the one on the far right, where all we see is the shape. And we can tell by the slender pointed wings that it is a falcon. So we've at least narrowed it down to 3 in the East Coast. But again, most often we're only going to see that dark shadow. We're not going to see all that beautiful coloration that we see on the left-hand side. And as I said before, it's all about putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Oftentimes, you only need a few pieces of the puzzle to actually definitively identify it. The image will appear after just a few pieces come together. So maybe you look at the shape of the wing, the tail, how it's flying, things like that. And maybe 2 or 3 of those together are enough to determine that this is a red tail, even before that flashy red tail comes into view. And, you know, you're not always guaranteed a red tail on red-tailed hawks either. So you have to watch out for those juvenile birds. Just real quick, you know, the general migrating raptor families, and I say general, you know, I'm not going to go over every family. We're not going to go through kites today. There's several that are missing. But again, East Coast, you know, you find yourself at Rockfish Gap. This is going to be a good session for you to prepare before you go out to that site. So our accipiters, or our forest-dwelling raptors, like our sharp-shinned hawks that you see here, or Cooper's hawks, we're going to go through accipiters. Our falcons, our fast, our speed devils, speed demons, the peregrine that you see here, American Kestrel, the Merlin that we saw in the video clips earlier. We'll also go through our bootios, those open land soaring hawks that are more broad-winged in nature, and offer, you know, a lot less flapping, prefer a lot more soaring, especially as they're migrating. Then we'll go through our eagles, just 2 here in North America that we're going to go through, our bald eagle, as you see here, as well as our beautiful golden eagle. And of course, you know, I didn't mention the vultures. We're going to go through turkey and black vulture. We'll go through osprey and northern harrier as well. But, you know, that represented just the main families in terms of identification. So all of our ID slides themselves are going to be set up this way. So just to kind of give you some geography of the slide, on the left-hand side, you'll see the range maps, which is nice, as you can get a good idea or a good sense for where these birds are going each fall. You'll have one photo of the bird, their soaring and gliding profile. So oftentimes I get the question, what is the difference between soaring and gliding? And so real quick, soaring is what often you see red-tails doing during the summer. So they're just lazily going in circles, oftentimes rising in altitude, rarely flapping unless it's very windy or they're not getting a lot of lift. They won't flap much and they're just lazily making circles, gaining in altitude. That is classic soaring. Gliding or active flight, where they're flapping and gliding, that gliding would be like active flight, you know, going left to right or front to back, that sort of thing. They might be flapping and gliding, holding that altitude and going from point A to point B. So I would consider that gliding or active flight with gliding mixed in. And then underneath, back to these slides, underneath the soaring and gliding profiles, you'll see a few quick flight tips, the more important ones. But pay attention to the soaring and gliding profiles. They change for every single species. So when you're struggling to compare a Sharpie and a coop, which often is a very tough call in the field, their soaring profiles are slightly different. So that can come in handy. So speaking of our Sharp-shinned, we'll go ahead and dive right in. These guys are light and dainty. They're very snappy flyers, so their wing beat is very, very quick, very snappy, and it's more from the wrist instead of the whole wing, okay? So when we're comparing Sharpie to coops, the coop is gonna use more of the entire wing. The Sharpie's more from the wrist or the shoulder outward. They're very fluttery, very snappy wing beat. And again, like I said earlier, be very careful about the square tail. If you see an accipiter with a square tail, don't just use the square tail as your definitive ID. You know, upwards of 8–10% of Sharpies that come through a watch will look like they have round tails. And the same is true for coops. You know, upwards of 8 or 10% of coops that come through a watch, you'll see will have squared off tails. So it's something to really, you know, you can use that field mark, but use it along with others before you definitively say it's a Sharpie or a coop. The other big thing with Sharp-shinns is their heads are often tucked back and they appear very, very small. There's no head projection, which you would see in a Cooper's hawk. And also, especially in a glide and active flight, they will throw their wrists or their shoulders forward, and it kind of creates this nice little pocket for their heads to sit within. And their heads are, again, very small and tucked back, so very tiny. There's very little head projection, and that would be a classic look of a Sharp-shin. So we're going to show a video clip. I'll walk you through the ID for each one of these birds. This is a classic Sharpie. Also notice where the tail meets the body on this soaring bird. It comes to a very thin pinch point. It ends abruptly before the body begins. Kind of comes to a point. Also notice, look at that head. Look how small that head is in relation to the body. And the soaring Sharp-shinned hawk is going to be flat wings. So no upturned wing. It's very flat in a soar. Look at that very snappy, quick wing beat. Again, small head, flat winged while in a soar, and very, very quick, snappy wing beat. They soar in very tight circles, and they're very active as they're soaring, as you noticed. Now notice the wings have flattened out or even gone to a slight bow in a glide there. There he's gliding. And again, look at the flap, very snappy, very quick, and more from the wrist outward. When they glide overhead like this, they look to me like button mushrooms that you'd buy at your grocery store, right there. Little button mushrooms flying overhead. So that's your Sharp-shinned hawk. And in comparison, here's our coop, our Cooper's hawk. Notice that soaring profile. When they're in a soar, their wings are slightly upturned. Gliding profile is much the same, but in a soar, that's a nice tip to look for. They have a stiffer wing beat. Again, it's using the whole wing, not just the wrist like the Sharpie was. So look for that larger, stiffer wing beat where it's using the entire wing. They project their heads forward, their larger heads, and they project them forward more often than not, you will see the wing, the leading edge or the front edge of the wing is perpendicular to the body, which also gives more appearance of this large head or very projected forward head. So those are a few tips about our Cooper's hawk. Again, we'll see this soaring bird. It's using all of the wing when it's flapping. And when he comes around in that soar, you're going to see that his wings are slightly upturned, which rarely you will see in a sharp-shinned hawk. So just slightly upturned in a soar. And when he comes around, look at how much further ahead the head is projecting. Those wings are very perpendicular to the body, and the head is thrust forward in front of those wings. This bird is going to soar in wider circles than the sharp-shinned hawk. It is heavier, so therefore it's much more stable in flight. So it's not going to flap or be as energetic in its soar as much as the Sharpie is. And he's just going to soar in nice, lazy, wide circles. In active flight, the bird is again going to have just ever so slightly drooped wings when it's gliding. And look at that wing beat, it's slightly slower and again uses more of the entire wing, and instead of the Sharpie, who only uses maybe more of the wrist outward. So that's our Cooper's hawk. Now, the beauty of Hawks on the Wing. So as you heard, I've authored Hawks on the Wing, which is a movie for identification of raptors in flight. And what makes Hawks on the Wing special is the ability to see two raptors on the screen at the same time, flying side by side, while I walk you through identifying each of them and how to decipher the two. So this is just a still image of a Cooper's hawk on the left. Notice that large head projected forward versus the sharp-shinned on your right-hand side, where the shoulders are just thrown forward just a little bit, again, creating that pocket for that smaller head to sit within, kind of a classic posture of the sharp-shinned. But now I'm going to show you the side-by-side from the movie that you can experience, seeing the two birds flying on the screen side by side.
The Sharp-shinned versus Cooper's comparison represents one of the most difficult pairings, but there are clues that help distinguish the two. Notice the Cooper's hawk on the right has a longer, bulkier tail that also feels more round. Don't forget, however, the round versus square tail doesn't always hold true. Also notice the Sharpie on the left shows a smaller head that is tucked back closer to the body, where the Coop's head projects forward. While soaring, Sharpies will flap more often because they are less stable, where the Coop holds steady. Also look as the Sharp-shinned hawk is making tighter circles. The bird is actually starting to get ahead of the Coop. Comparing the wing flap is easier when side by side. Notice the Cooper's hawk has a slightly slower wing beat, but more importantly, it's using more of the entire wing, whereas the Sharpie is quicker, snappier, and flaps more from the wrist outward. Check out this Sharpie displaying its tendency to flap more often, where the Coop is gliding longer between flaps.
Okay, so next we'll move into our falcons, starting us off with the American Kestrel. This bird is very light and dainty, and the wing shape to me looks like banana peels. So it's basically a bird with banana peels slapping the air. They're very long and slender, very pointed wings, and in a soar they're held straight out, just as you see here. Obviously, as a falcon, they sweep them back for speed when they're in active flight or in glide motion. Their wing beat is very light and fluttery. It's very shallow. And again, they're just quite dainty overall. Kestrels oftentimes will rise and lower in altitude and fly all over the place in their space, whereas their look-alike cousin, in some cases, the Merlin, tends to fly from point A to B very straight and very quickly. So if you see something that's more erratic, going up and down in altitude, that's likely a Kestrel. So let's see our Kestrel in the air. Look for those long banana peel shaped wings. Here's a soaring bird. Notice they're held at right angles to her body there. Very pointed, slender, again, banana peels for wings. Flat winged in a soar. This bird is going up and down. It's being buffeted in the wind very easily, given how lightweight this bird is. And once we start to see it flap, you'll see it more or less somewhat whipping the air. The peregrines are more whip-like, but the wing beat is very light and fluttery. In active flight here, when it's in a glide, it will drop or droop its wings, especially at the tips. But in active flight here, it's a fluttery wing beat, as you can see here. Very, very light. It also, the kestrels will take on that flap, flap, flap glide technique that we see in the accipiters. Quite often, the kestrel will do that with ease as well. Notice that slightly, just ever so slightly drooped wings. But the difference oftentimes is that much longer, thinner winged look about them, where the Sharpie or the Coop is going to be much thicker winged compared to a kestrel. Next is our Merlin, and one of the best tips I ever got from one of my mentors is, you know, Merlins look like kestrels on steroids. They're the bodybuilder of the falcon family. They're much stockier, especially if you look at those wings. Even though they take on the classic falcon shape, they're stockier looking. So especially in those secondaries, that midpoint of the wing here, that wing is much stockier and thicker looking than the thin banana peel looking wing of the kestrel. The body of the Merlin is also chunkier or stockier, and they're going to always look darker than kestrels, even compared to a female kestrel. Merlins will always look darker, especially in the East Coast. They are absolutely fearless and will go after anything in their path, whether it's as small as a kestrel or as large as a golden eagle. They're very, very fast. Their wing beat is very powerful and incredibly steady. And a lot of books will describe it, the wing beat of the Merlin, much like a piston engine. It never stops. It just goes up and down, up and down, up and down very powerfully and never ending. These guys, behaviorally, like I said, they like to hunt on the wing while they're in migration, so that's something to look for. They also like to hug tree lines or beaches, depending on where you are. So Rockfish Gap, they're going to hug that ridge, and oftentimes, I'm sure as Vic can attest, the Merlin is oftentimes either missed or barely found coming up the ridge right before it crosses and continues its way south. So they are hard to find and oftentimes only seen at the last minute.
Josh, can I hop in 1 second?
Yes, please.
I recently heard that a comment about the Merlin, that whoever named it and gave it 2 syllables, it's too long. It should just be 1 syllable, because by the time you yell out Merlin, after the 2nd syllable, it's gone.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. I love it. That's so apt. You know, these guys are often, like Vic was just pointing out, just seen at the last minute, and visitors that are at the site hoping for a Merlin, oftentimes they have to be very, very quick to catch them once they hear it called out. So this is going to be our Merlin in flight. Again, look for stockier looking wings, more powerful wing beat. They don't soar very often. I do have a clip here that you're going to see the bird soaring. Very steady wing beat. It's more powerful. It just looks like they're more suited to flight than the kestrel. This is a soaring bird that just barely you can see slightly angled down or decurved wings. Look how much more thick and stocky those wings are compared to the banana peel looking wing of the kestrel. These Merlins rarely soar. This is more often what you're going to see. They're flying from point A to point B in a very finite line, and they're basically a rocket, and they just fly straight from point A to point B. If you're lucky enough to get them high like this out in the open, this is the powerful wing beat you're going to see. They stay their course, they rocket through it, and by the time you see them, they're gone, long gone, you know, going 40, 50 or more miles per hour. They're just incredibly fast, and if you're lucky enough to see one, it's often from behind. So that's a nice little trick. Kestrels are much higher. They're out in the open. You're going to see kestrels coming. If you see a falcon that's stockier, dark, and appear only at the last minute, that behavior can tell you, at least give you one of the pieces of the puzzle. Rounding out our falcon is our Peregrine Falcon. So these birds are much more prominent, heavy, and stable in the air. Their wing beat is very smooth, it's very even, and it almost looks like they're whipping the air. They soar in very wide circles, and when they're in a soar, their tails are often fanned way out. So that's a nice thing to look for. I find that comparing a peregrine to a kestrel is really, there's no comparison. It's very easy to tell the difference between those two. However, especially as distance can play a role with lone birds, you don't know how big they really are. Merlins can look like peregrines, especially in active flight. So they're two that you have to look out for. Again, that when we look at the video here, look for a very smooth whip-like wing beat. So here's a soaring bird. When they soar, much like the kestrels, they hold their thin wings very perpendicular to their bodies. And oftentimes they're so symmetrical as they leave the body and go to the tip. They're very symmetrical from trailing edge to leading edge. They look like a candle flame coming out of both sides of the body. Look for just slightly upturned, flat to upturned wings in a soar. And now in active flight, it's a smooth wing beat. It's not as powerful as the Merlin. Somewhat shallow. There is some debate over whether that's a shallow wing beat. But it's whip-like. It looks like the bird is whipping the air as it's flying through. This bird actually has some disheveled primary feathers, but the wing beat is the same nonetheless. It's still a classic whip-like wing beat of the Peregrine Falcon. Notice the long tail, and there's much more substance to that tail as well. Now we'll go into our bootios, the classic red-tailed hawk. This is the bodybuilder of the bootios, and really the bootio to compare all other bootios to. So bootios being a red-tailed, red-shouldered, broad-winged hawk and rough-legged hawk that we're going to see. Their soaring profile is, their wings are slightly upturned, so a slight upturned dihedral as we call it. They're very, very stable. They're broad, very muscular looking. And so when I'm talking about muscular looking wings, this trailing edge here, this trailing edge of the wing is what I'm referring to as being muscular. It's very large and drooping. Be careful for that red tail. You're only going to see the red tail in adult birds, or at least 1-year-olds and beyond. So you can't just use the color of the tail to definitively ID that red tail. All right, so let's see our red tail in flight. All right, look at those trailing edges of the wings, very, very muscular. It looks like a bicep of a bodybuilder turned upside down. Upturned dihedral, just the slight upturned wing in a soar. There you get a nice view of that muscular wing that we see, especially in the trailing secondaries there. Also notice the tail almost looks like the tail goes into the wings, not the body, because those trailing edge secondaries are so muscular and long. The wing beat of the red tail is somewhat, it's shallow, but it shows power. I think for the size of the body, this bird, it's somewhat snappy, but it's also very rhythmic. So shallow and rhythmic. And notice that head is very, very prominent and large. And if you're lucky enough to get the bird close enough in view, you can see that belly band and tell that it is a red tail, which is nice if they come close enough. There again, look at that nice, heavy looking, stable body. The wing beat is not very deep. It's pretty shallow, but very smooth. Okay. Next is our red-shouldered hawk. So these guys tend to appear more accipiter-like. So their wing beat is snappier and even stiffer than the red tail, and oftentimes it looks more accipiter-like, like it's a smaller bird. Part of that deals with their tails, giving you the illusion that it's longer as well. I think their somewhat more slender wings give that appearance, so that longer looking tail can trick you into thinking it's an accipiter. They're very quick and snappy in terms of the wing beat. They have a very peculiar glide profile. As you can see here, they go out and then droop heavily out to the tips of the wings. And in a soar, they often thrust their wings forward, so it almost looks like a C, and we'll see that in the video. If you're lucky enough to see them close enough or in the right light, you will see those crescents, those lighter, more translucent outer primary feathers that take on the shape of crescents. But again, that's only one piece of the puzzle, so you do have to be careful with that. So here we'll see a soaring bird, very snappy wing beat, much quicker than a red tail and very accipiter-like. And when he comes around, look at, this is what I'm talking about. The wings are thrust forward at the tips, and they have what looks like hands at the end of their wings. They don't come to a point like a broadwing does. And so they're more parallel, the tips of their wings are more parallel to the body. Again, very snappy wing beat, almost accipiter-like, and they're not as stable in the air as a red tail. Red tails are much heavier, much more stable birds. So these birds, and even a little bit of wind, are going to be buffeted or shaken around, and they're going to require several wing flaps to get back on course. So that's something to look for. Here's a gliding bird with that peculiar drooping wing shape. We're going to see it even better in the next bird. Again, when you see a gliding bird and it's windy, if it's being buffeted all over the place, that's a good clue you have a red shoulder compared to a red tail. There's, again, that drooping wing shape of a gliding red-shouldered. The last boodio we're going to go through tonight, we can't focus on everyone tonight, but the last one is going to be our broadwing, which Vic alluded to, some really impressive numbers that Rockfish was getting at least near the end of September. These birds are kind of the classic namesake of any Eastern hawk watch, where most hawk watchers are proud or excited to share their numbers. These birds are going into Central and South America. Almost, if not almost, all broadwings find their way through Veracruz, Mexico, down through the Gulf. They'll go through there all the way through Panama and down into South America. And so broadwings appear really clean and proper, different than the red shoulder. Remember how I mentioned they have flat tipped wings at the ends? They almost look like hands that are like parallel to the body. These guys will come more to tips. The shape of their wings look like paring knives. So if you have a paring knife in your drawer, go ahead and grab one of those at the end of the night, and you'll see that the shape of a paring knife is very similar or indicative of a broadwing hawk's wings. They tend to migrate in very large groups. They really prefer to soar and find thermal activity where they can get free lift from heated columns of air that allow them to soar and glide most of their way down to their wintering grounds. Many say that they use the same amount of energy migrating as they do just perched on a branch, because they're really avoiding flapping as much as they can. Let's see what these guys look like in flight. So here's a classic soaring broadwing. You can see, just look for the shape of the wing. It's very indicative, or looks very close to a paring knife. The wings go straight out from the body, both on the trailing edge and the leading edge. And then near the end, it drops into a point, and on the back, it comes up to a point. Very, very much like a paring knife. These birds always look very clean and proper to me. Even the juveniles look very shapely. There's rarely ever messed up broadwing feathers. They always just look really nice and clean. They soar on flat wings, so again, no upturned dihedral at all, very flat. And it's rare to see a single broadwing. More often than not, you're going to see broadwings in groups, especially if you're on a ridgeline site or along a lake shore. This is a more streaming, gliding, or active flight of a broadwing hawk. So this is likely a bird that's at the end of a stream out where he's flapped and glided all the way down, and now he's flapping around looking for the next thermal to jump in. We'll notice here a red tail, much heavier, lankier looking red tail come into view at the bottom. But the broadwing, that was a classic gliding broadwing, where they almost, in a glide, especially coming at you, they look more thin-winged as they're coming at you. Next, we'll talk about our eagles. This is the famed bald eagle, and bald eagles are very plank-like. So to me, I describe plank like a plank of wood. So to me, a bald eagle just looks like a 2x8 plank of wood with a head and tail. Their soaring profile is absolutely flat, and in a glide, they'll tend to drop their wings a little bit into just a kind of a decurved look, just ever so slightly drooping. They have very, very large heads with lots of head projection. Part of that is the massive bill that makes it look like part of their head. And obviously be very careful about bald eagles. You can't just call a bald eagle that is black and white with that white head and tail. We have about 4.5, 5 years of different modeling of the immature birds before they become adults. They have a very slow but very powerful wing beat, and as you see in the video, look for this, the wing beat actually goes further above the body in the upstroke than it does below the body in the downstroke. So they have a very deep upstroke to their wing beat. So first we'll see a soaring bird. Again, it looks like a 2x8 plank of wood with a head and tail. And why I say that, it's very rectangular looking. They're not broad, they're not muscular looking, they're very rectangular looking. They soar on flat wings, as you saw there. There's that nice rectangular plank-like wing, but notice how large the head is. It almost looks like it's the same length as the tail in this particular bird. Just massive head projection that you'll never see in a golden eagle. So that's one of the things that we'll look for. Notice again, those flat wings is soaring very flat right there. Now look how much slower that wing beat is, but it's very powerful, very smooth. And look at that deep upstroke, goes way up higher. Now these birds end on a downstroke when they go into a glide. We're gonna see that here in slow-mo right there. So when they're flapping and they wanna go into a glide, they end on a downstroke. Look at that shallow wing beat, but also that it's, again, going deeper in the upstroke than it is in the downstroke. It doesn't go below the body very much at all. And in a glide like this, you're going to see slightly bowed or drooping wings. Now we'll talk about our golden eagle, and these guys, not like the bald eagle, their heads are very small looking. So their heads look very, very small compared to the length of their tail. Their wing shape is not plank-like. It's more booty-o-like or more shapely or more broad or muscular looking, so more round looking. They take on a shallow dihedral, especially in a soar, and I find it to be about the same amount of upturn as a red-tailed hawk. It's just a much larger bird. Their wing flap is very slow and powerful, but it's more flappy. It's not as stiff as the bald eagle. So we're going to see more wing, like almost like a sail flapping in the wind. There's more flop to it. So notice in the soaring bird, look at the shapely wing. It's not as rectangular looking as the bald eagle. The wing beat there is much more floppy or loose. And right there you see a slight upturned dihedral where that wing is just slightly upturned. And we're going to notice that in a soaring profile. So this bird is soaring again in circles, lazily, gaining in altitude. Look at the wing flap, especially at the tips of the wings. They're more loose and flappy or floppy, whereas the bald eagle is much more stiff, using the entire wing. There you can see all tail, almost no head. Obviously that changes depending on the angle you're looking at the bird. But more often than not, they appear with very small heads. So it's something to look for. Whereas the bald eagle ends its flapping to glide in a downstroke, the golden eagle is going to end on an upstroke and settle in right there. So that's something to look for. Again, look at the smaller head in relation to that much longer tail, which is not something that we'll see in the bald eagle. Now, I've been talking about this for the last few minutes, that comparison of the head length to the length of the tail. The head of the golden eagle is going to be half or even smaller than the length of the tail, whereas the bald eagle on the right, you're going to see the head is half or larger, and oftentimes, like you can see in this particular image, almost the same size as the tail, just absolutely massive. So now let's check out the comparison video right from Hawks on the Wing.
Bald and golden eagles are both large and prominent in the sky, but some key differences are easy to pick out once you know what to look for. Even though the bald eagle on the left is closer, it shows thick, rectangular planked wings. It looks like a 2x8 plank of wood with a head and a tail. Speaking of heads, make sure to key in on the size of the head compared to the length of the tail. The bald eagle's head can appear as long as its tail, where the golden's head appears to be half the length of its tail or smaller. The golden on the right appears more bootiol-like with more muscular wings. Notice too, the bald eagle is soaring with flat wings. In comparison, the golden eagle has a slight upturned dihedral. The wing beat of the bald eagle is slow and stiff, but look at that deep upstroke. Golden eagles have slow wing beats as well, but they're uniformly shallow. Check out how the bald eagle ends on a downstroke when flapping. In comparison, the golden eagle ends on an upstroke before settling into its glide.
All right. So now our vultures. So of course our turkey vulture, most of you are probably very familiar with our turkey vulture. They're very special to me in migration. There's just something different about seeing, you know, like this weekend we had, you know, a few thousand turkey vultures coming through in good flights. Something very special about seeing big flights of vultures come through. You'll want to look for that very deep upstroke or upturned dihedral. They appear very headless. Their tails are much longer and nice and stocky, very rectangular looking, and their heads are almost, you know, they're almost just non-existent. You can barely see them. They teeter a lot in flight, and they're very unstable, and they rock around a lot, almost like they just want nothing to do with flapping their wings at all. They will do anything to not flap their wings. So here we'll see our turkey vulture in flight. You'll see right away, it's kind of brushing its shoulders a little bit, classic vulture look. It's teetering and rocking all over the place, keeping that upturned dihedral in place, but avoiding flapping its wings. Notice the shimmery silver trailing edge of the wing goes from body all the way to the tip of the wings. We'll see a little difference in that in the black vulture next. And check out, again, there's that big, deep upturned dihedral, that upturned wing. And look at that stocky, thick, rectangular tail. Almost every facet of flight, you're going to see that same looking tail in turkey vulture. Look at that upturned dihedral. It's still rocking around as it's, and it's very black and very dark overall. When they're in a glide, they take on what's called a modified dihedral, where the wings go up and then flatten out from wrist to tip. You can see the 5 fingers and the wing tips hanging out the end. We'll wait for him to stop. There you can see those finger tips of their wings hanging out. Classic turkey vulture. Now its cousin, the black vulture. Remember the silvery trailing edge we saw in the wing of the turkey vulture? You're only going to see in the tips of the black vulture. And this is a bird that almost looks like it just dipped its wing tips in silver paint and then took off for flight. They're very small and very stocky. They appear like they have almost no tail. In a lot of cases, their feet will be hanging either down or past their tail. They're very quick, choppy wing beat, and the shape of this bird is more indicative of an eagle than a vulture. So let's see what these guys look like. To me, their wing flap always looks really hurried. Here you can see that short tail on the bird, the legs you can see hanging down, and only silvery tips to the wings, as if he dipped his tips of his wings in paint and then took flight. Again, they don't have feathers on their heads either, so they'll tend to appear headless as well, but that short, tiny tail and those feet hanging below is something you'd never see in a turkey vulture. That's something to really key in on. They're much stockier, shorter looking birds. They, to me, look more like the shape of an eagle than that of a more rectangular vulture. And that it looks like a bat in flight to me. Much stiffer, snappier, quicker wing beat, and it looks hurried to me, almost like he's trying to catch up with a sibling that's older. Very hurried wing beat, and their wings are either perpendicular or even slightly thrust forward. All right, to finish out, just with a couple last species to go, our northern harrier. Again, another bird that's very plank-like, similar to that plank-like eagle, the bald eagle we saw earlier. But in this case, the birds are much, much longer tailed, and their wings are much thinner. So where we call the bald eagle a 2x8 plank of wood, we might call this a 2x4 plank of wood with a head and a tail. Very, very deep, pronounced upturned dihedral to the wing. Whether they're soaring or gliding. Very slow, steady wing beat. They're quite buoyant when they look like they're bouncing basketballs with the tips of their wings, and they take often a lot of lift with every flap that they take. Again, very long, slender wings with very, very long tail. There's a classic soaring harrier. Notice very deep upturned dihedral. Just as deep as, say, that turkey vulture we were seeing earlier. Much longer tail. Here we can see that white rump, but be very careful with white-rumped raptors. Oftentimes even Cooper's hawks, juvenile bootios will show undertail coverts, especially in the wind, will kind of fold up and over their base of their tails, giving them the appearance of a white rump. So that's only one piece of the puzzle for a harrier. We want to look at this gliding bird, and we see that upturned dihedral, but it's starting to take on slight bit of modified dihedral where the wings go up and then at a either flat or shallow ascent to the tips. Really, the takeaway for this bird is very thin-winged, little rocket bodies with tiny, thin, long, slender wings. Slow, powerful wing beat, very, very at home in the air. And these guys are going to take on a totally different flight when you see them hunting in a marsh. They're much more erratic and all over the place, where in migration, they tend to fly from point A to point B with a purpose. I love that tip about bouncing basketballs. That wing just looks like they're bouncing basketballs. That came from Eric Brunke, who is the current counter at Cape May, New Jersey. And last on our list is our osprey. So I don't know about the ridgeline counts, but where I count here in the Midwest along the Great Lakes, we have a lot of osprey, both migrant and local that come through or hanging around. And at the beginning, you mentioned you heard me mention different types of wing flaps, and I mentioned one that looked painful or arthritic, and that is the osprey to a T. They don't look like they enjoy flapping at all. It just looks painful, and many of the books will say it looks like they have arthritis. They very, very long winged birds. They're black or dark brown and white, so they trick you a lot into thinking that it's a gull. And so if you first think you have a gull that turns into a raptor, it's always an osprey. So be careful. They are a bird that in all facets of flight, it looks like their wing shape overhead looks like a shallow capital M, as in Mary. And also in all facets of flight, they take on slightly bowed or curved downward wings. So here's our osprey. Look at that as he comes around. We'll see the shallow shape of a capital M. So look for that. All the white in this bird and the dark brown, along with those very thin, crooked wings, gives a very gull-like appearance. There's that shallow M. Goes up, down, just like the capital M as in Mary. They soar very, very lazily. They are very lightweight birds and very adept to soaring, very good at it. They don't often have to flap much. In hunting, you'll see them hover hunting a lot over water as they're searching for prey, similar to what we saw the Kestrel doing, but just with a much slower wing beat. Look at those long, crooked wings. Now we have an active flyer. There's that wing flap that's shallow, and it just looks like it's in pain. It doesn't want to be flapping. But again, it carries that M shape and as well those crooked, down-shaped, downward bowed wings in active flight. No different than you'd see in soaring flight as well. That's our osprey. So those are the species that I have for you tonight. Here's the cool thing though. I have this slide, if you can see it okay. Go ahead and get ready to go to your chat windows. These are all of the side-by-side video clips from Hawks on the Wing. So if there is a specific pairing of two birds that you'd like to see together, maybe turkey vulture versus golden eagle, or broadwing versus red-shouldered hawk, or something like that, either unmute yourself and call it out, or feel free to type it right in your chat window, and we can play a couple. So what would people like to see? If I don't hear anybody, come unmuted, feel free. I'll pick one.
Hey, Josh, I'd like to see the American Kestrel versus the Merlin.
All right, that's a good one. Here we go.
While these two raptors both have classic falcon wings, there are some key things to look for that will help you better tell them apart. Notice the Merlin on the left has slightly stockier wings. They are especially hefty from the body to the wrists. The Kestrel on the right appears thinner and longer winged. In fact, everything about the Kestrel is thinner all around. Be careful as both birds hold their wings slightly drooped in a soar. Be sure to pay attention to other clues. Notice the Kestrel is rising and lowering, both while flapping and gliding. In active flight, the Merlin flaps more often and is more active overall. The wing beat of the Merlin is fast at a constant even rate. They have a direct line of flight and rocket through it. The Kestrel often flaps and glides in an alternating fashion. They're more buoyant and move around a lot in their space.
Okay, someone on the chat is interested in seeing anything with a rough-legged. So let's do red-tailed and rough-legged. And I don't know about rockfish, but we're not going to start seeing rough-leggeds here in southeast Michigan until right about now, barely, but we usually count on them end October into November.
Red-taileds and rough-leggeds are similar in size. They are, however, quite different in shape, wing beat, and demeanor. Notice the rough-legged on the left seems more buoyant. These lightweight birds can't handle the winds like the heavy red-tailed on the right. Look at the red-tailed's broad, more muscular wings on the right, where the rough-legged on the left seems thinner and longer winged. The rough-legged also pushes its wings forward in a soar, where the red-tailed holds its wings closer to perpendicular with the body. When soaring, look closely at the wing position. Rough-leggeds will have a more severe upturned dihedral, where red-taileds only have a gentle rise. In active flight, the shape of the birds is telling. The rough-legged hawk appears to have a short, small body with a thin, long tail, where the red-tailed hawk looks heavier along with the body extending into the tail. Also notice the wing beat of the red-tailed hawk is slightly faster and shallower than the deep, powerful wing beat of the rough-legged hawk.
Okay, we've got goshawk versus Coopers.
Even though goshawks are larger than Cooper's hawks, size is often hard to judge with lone birds. Check out the goshawk on the left. The bird has a thicker, square-looking tail and slightly stockier-looking wings, giving hints of striving to be a bootial. The Cooper's hawk on the right is long-tailed with thinner-looking wings compared to the goshawk. When soaring, these birds hold their wings in a slightly different manner. The goshawk holds its wings flat, where the coop is showing a slight upturn or dihedral. Just as Sharpies make tighter circles than coops when soaring, coops make tighter circles than goshawks. Notice how in control the goshawk is on the left. Its wing beat is also very smooth and powerful. In contrast, the Cooper's hawk is flapping more and seems less stable as it rises and drops in the air. Look at the goshawk's large head and extreme bulging on the trailing edges of its wings. The coop is stocky, but nowhere near as muscular.
Okay. do another one if someone would like to unmute themselves and pick a new one. Maybe this can be our last one before we take some questions. I will pick, let's do turkey vulture and black vulture.
Size, demeanor, and wing flap are the basic things needed to tell these two vultures apart. When soaring, the black vulture on the left has shorter wings and almost no tail compared to the turkey vulture on the right. Also notice the black vulture's wings are pushed forward when soaring, unlike the rectangular winged turkey vulture. When soaring, the black vulture will be more stable and not teeter or wobble as much as the turkey vulture. Both birds have upturned dihedrals, but the black vulture will be more shallow. Check out the wing flap of the black vulture. It's fast and choppy. They give the impression of a little kid trying to catch up with their older siblings. The turkey vulture almost never flaps and instead rocks and wobbles in the wind excessively. Even though they are both vultures, they appear very different in flight.
Okay, Jack, so I'm going to come back to you. Before I turn it back over to you, I do just want to show, hopefully you can see that on screen. Feel free to visit my website, hawksonthewing.com, if you're interested in purchasing some of the content that you saw here. I also offer a quick reference guide and a laminated pocket guide. So feel free to peruse the site. You can also, whether you want to invest in something like this or not, check out the website. There's a lot of information on, where to go hawk watching, where to find hawk watching data from all of North America through Humana, the Hawk Migration Association of North America. And I also have galleries of all my best images from way more than just raptors, from other birds, songbirds, perching birds to landscapes. So, Jack.